Drake Carrion adjusted his grip on the plasma rifle, the weapon humming faintly as its capacitors charged. His body armor, designed for interplanetary warfare, felt like overkill in the opulent halls of the Vorellian celestial citadel. Despite the high ceilings adorned with floating light prisms, the alien architecture did little to put him at ease. This was meant to be a simple diplomatic mission, but Drake had been in the field long enough to know when things felt off. "You seem on edge, Terran," said Ambassador Zeren, walking beside him. Zeren's translucent blue skin and elongated frame shimmered in the citadel's ambient glow. His voice carried the melodic undertone common to Vorellian speech, making even a casual remark sound like a song. "With all due respect, sir," Drake replied, "places like this don't usually need a guy like me unless someone's expecting trouble." The ambassador gave a soft laugh. "Ah, but your species has a reputation for thriving in chaos. After all, who else would turn the Battle of Proxima into a Terran victory?" Drake's jaw tightened. Proxima had been a bloodbath, a desperate struggle against impossible odds. Humanity's survival there had earned them a wary respect across the galaxy, and a reputation for unpredictability. The grand doors ahead opened, revealing the throne room. Drake halted in his tracks, momentarily awestruck. The room was massive, its crystalline walls capturing and refracting starlight into a swirling aurora. Floating platforms connected by translucent walkways circled a central dais. Upon it sat Queen Kalythra, her crimson hair cascading down like living fire over her shimmering white gown. Her light green skin, a hallmark of the Vorellian elite, seemed to pulse faintly with bioluminescence. "Welcome, Ambassador Zeren," her voice rang out like a clear bell, "and to your Terran guardian. My gratitude for your vigilance." Drake inclined his head, sensing the measured scrutiny in her silver eyes. He noticed how her guards stiffened slightly at his presence. Their energy weapons were drawn but not aimed, yet. The diplomatic exchange began with all the expected pleasantries, but Drake's instincts screamed at him. His eyes swept the room, noting the guards' positions and the faint shimmer in the air near an upper balcony. Then he saw it, a distortion in the light, subtle but unmistakable. "Down!" he barked, lunging toward the queen. A plasma bolt seared through the air where she'd been sitting, striking her crystalline throne and shattering it into a storm of fragments. Drake rolled, his rifle snapping to his shoulder, and fired. The active camouflage on the would-be assassin flickered and failed as the figure crumpled to the floor, purple blood pooling beneath them. The room erupted into chaos. "Secure the queen!" one guard shouted, while others swarmed the fallen assassin. Kalythra remained calm, though her hands trembled slightly as Drake pulled her to her feet. "You saved me," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Just doing my job, Your Majesty," he replied, scanning the room for any other threats. "No," she corrected, her tone formal and heavy with significance. "By the oldest law of my people, you are owed a wish, anything within my power to grant." "Speak it now, Terran." The room fell silent. Even the guards froze, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. Drake hesitated. He could ask for wealth, power, or technology far beyond Terran capabilities. But as his gaze met Kalythra's, he saw something unexpected, a glimmer of loneliness behind her regal facade. "I wish," he said, his voice firm, "to be with you, Your Majesty." A collective gasp rippled through the throne room. Kalythra's expression shifted from shock to indignation, her green skin darkening in what Drake guessed was their equivalent of a blush. "You dare?" she began, but tradition held her captive. She couldn't refuse. "Guards," she said through gritted teeth, "escort this audacious Terran to my chambers. I will deal with him there." As Drake was led away, he caught Ambassador Zeren's gaze. The Vorellian's expression was a mix of horror and admiration, as though he were thinking only a Terran would dare. Drake simply smiled. Humanity hadn't become a galactic power by playing it safe. The royal chambers were unlike anything Drake had ever seen, a fusion of ancient artistry and cutting-edge technology. Crystal walls pulsed softly, mimicking the heartbeat of a living organism. Yet despite the beauty, the tension in the room was palpable. Kalythra stormed in, her crimson hair floating around her like a halo of fire. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she demanded, circling him like a predator sizing up its prey. "Exercised my rights under your laws," Drake replied calmly, his hands clasped behind his back. "You've mocked my traditions," she snapped. Was this a calculated move, Terran arrogance, or sheer foolishness? "Maybe a bit of all three," he admitted, earning a glare that could have melted steel. "But mostly, it's because I meant it." Kalythra paused, her eyes narrowing. "Explain." "You're more than a queen," he said, his voice softening. "I saw it in your eyes, a weight you've carried for so long. You've forgotten how to put it down. You reminded me of every leader I've ever served under, fighting battles no one else sees. I want to help you carry that weight." The queen studied him for a long moment, her fury ebbing into curiosity. "Do you realize what you've asked for?" she said finally. "To stand beside me isn't a privilege, it's a burden. One that will make you a target for those who despise change." "I've been a target before," he said with a shrug. "And I'm still here." A faint smile touched her lips, but it vanished quickly. "This isn't over, Terran. You've tied your fate to mine, and I suspect the galaxy won't take kindly to it." "Then we'll face it together," he said, meeting her gaze unflinchingly. Her silver eyes softened, just for a moment. "You're either incredibly brave or impossibly foolish. Why not both?" For the first time, Kalythra laughed, a sound like music, brief but genuine. "Very well," she said, her voice regaining its regal tone. "Let's see if you're worth the chaos you've unleashed." And with that, the real adventure began. Drake's days in the Vorellian Celestial Palace were a mix of formal diplomacy, etiquette lessons, and constant vigilance. Despite the serene beauty of the palace, danger lurked around every corner. The assassination attempt had been the first crack in the veneer, and Drake knew better than to believe it was an isolated incident. His status as the Queen's chosen companion caused ripples throughout the court. Some whispered in disapproval, others in fascination, but all watched him with scrutiny. Vorellian nobles were as sharp as their crystalline architecture, and Drake was a Terran outsider in every sense. His one solace was Kalythra herself. Despite their rocky start, she began to trust him, not just as her protector but as an ally. Their late-night conversations shifted from tactical planning to more personal topics. She spoke of the burdens of leadership, of the centuries-old traditions that bound her, and the isolation that came with the crown. "Your people are different," she said one evening as they stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing city below. "You adapt to chaos, even thrive in it. I envy that." "And yet here you are," Drake replied, his brown eyes meeting her silver ones, "holding an empire together with grace and strength. I think we could learn a thing or two from you." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Terran." "Who said I was flattering you?" The tranquility of their evenings was shattered 3 weeks after Drake's wish. Kalythra had just adjourned a meeting of her High Council when Lord Commander Vareth stormed into the Queen's private study. "My queen," Vareth said, his tone grim, "we've intercepted a transmission. The Purists are mobilizing." Drake tensed. The Purists were a shadowy faction within Vorellian society, opposed to any alliances with other species, especially humanity. "What have they planned?" Kalythra asked, her voice steady but her hands gripping the edge of her desk. Vareth hesitated, his golden eyes flicking toward Drake. "Say it," the Queen commanded. "The Purists are targeting your union with the Terran." Drake's fists clenched. "So, this isn't just about you. It's about us." "Indeed," Vareth confirmed. "Their goal is to destabilize the throne by turning public sentiment against you. They've spread rumors that the Terrans are manipulating you for power." Kalythra's expression darkened. "Do they have evidence?" "No," Vareth replied, "but they don't need it. Fear is a powerful tool, my queen." Drake stepped forward. "Then we take their weapon away. Let me confront them." "Absolutely not," Kalythra said sharply. "You're already a target. I won't risk you walking into their trap." "I'm already in their sights," Drake countered. "But if we expose them, we can stop their plans before they gain momentum." Kalythra's gaze softened, but her resolve remained firm. You are audacious, Terran, but this is my fight, not yours. Drake shook his head. It's ours. That's what this union means, doesn't it? After a long pause, she sighed. Very well. But we do this together. Drake and Kalythra's plan was simple in theory. Infiltrate a known purist stronghold during one of their secret gatherings. What they found, however, was far worse than they had imagined. The hidden facility buzzed with activity. Holograms projected maps of Vorellian territory, and crates of advanced weaponry lined the walls. But it was the presence of Proximian stealth tech, identical to that used in the assassination attempt, that confirmed their suspicions. They're working with outside forces, Drake whispered. Kalythra's jaw tightened. They would betray their own people to further their hatred. The purist leader, a sharp-featured Vorellian named Prexel, stood at the center of the room. Our time is now, he declared, his voice echoing. The Queen's union with the Terran is an abomination. We cannot allow this alliance to corrupt our empire. Drake leaned closer to Kalythra, his voice low. If we can get him to confess to treason, we can turn this whole thing around. You mean provoke him, she replied, her lips quirking. You Terrans really do have a talent for chaos. Before he could respond, an alarm blared. Intruders, a guard shouted. Drake cursed under his breath. Guess we're improvising. As guards flooded the room, Drake and Kalythra moved in perfect sync. Her energy blade shimmered as it sliced through opponents, while Drake's plasma rifle delivered precise shots that disabled purist operatives without killing them. Secure the leader, Kalythra shouted over the chaos. Drake tackled Prexel, pinning him to the ground. You've lost, he growled. Have I? Prexel sneered, activating a hidden beacon on his wrist. A distant rumble shook the facility. Kalythra's voice came over the comms. Drake, the beacon's triggering explosives. We need to evacuate. No time, Drake replied, disabling the beacon with a well-aimed pulse shot. The explosives are tied to their power grid. If we overload it, we can neutralize the threat. How? Kalythra asked, already moving to his side. Together, Drake said, grabbing her hand. He placed her other hand on a crystalline console, the energy responding to her touch. Through their combined effort, the system pulsed with power, overloading the purist network. Explosions rippled harmlessly along containment lines, sparing the facility but crippling their operations. As the dust settled, Kalythra turned to Drake, her eyes blazing. You Terrans never cease to amaze me. And you Vorellians, he replied, are worth every risk. With the purists exposed and their plot foiled, Kalythra and Drake stood before the Vorellian High Council. Evidence of the purists' treachery was laid bare, and their alliance with external factions was undeniable. You've risked everything, Ambassador Zeren said, addressing Kalythra, but in doing so, you've shown us a new path. The council erupted in debate, but Kalythra held her ground. Our future lies not in isolation, she declared, her voice ringing through the chamber, but in unity. As the council voted to solidify their alliance with humanity, Drake felt her hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, knowing their journey was far from over. Later, as they stood on the palace balcony, watching the stars, Kalythra leaned against him. You realize this is just the beginning. Drake smiled, pulling her closer. Good. I'm not done surprising you yet. The Vorellian palace buzzed with renewed purpose in the weeks following the purist conspiracy's downfall. Delegates from across the galaxy arrived daily, inspired by Queen Kalythra's bold vision of unity. Drake, now officially titled Ambassador Consort, found himself at the center of a whirlwind of politics, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. But the peace was fragile. Even as alliances strengthened, whispers of dissent remained. The purists had been defeated, but their ideals persisted in the shadows. Drake sat in the Queen's private study one evening, a glass of Vorellian nectar in hand. Kalythra worked nearby, her crimson hair glowing faintly in the bioluminescent light. She glanced up, sensing his unease. You're restless, she said. Can't help it, he admitted. Taking out Prexel felt like winning the war, but this feels like waiting for the next battle. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. Peace is a battle of its own, Drake. It requires as much vigilance as any war. Before he could reply, the palace comm system chimed. Lord Commander Varitha's voice came through. My queen, there's been an incident on the outer colonies. A Vorellian supply ship has been attacked by unidentified forces. The survivors claim they were Terran. Drake shot to his feet. That's impossible. Terran forces wouldn't. Kalythra held up a hand, silencing him. Bring me the survivors and all available evidence, she commanded. Varith hesitated. Your Majesty, the Council is already debating retaliation. Then stall them, she replied firmly. I won't act without the truth. The evidence was damning, too damning. The attackers' ships bore Terran markings, and their tactics mirrored those of Earth's special forces. But Drake knew his people well enough to recognize inconsistencies. This is staged, he said, reviewing the footage with Kalythra. The markings are too perfect, the tactics just a little too sloppy. Whoever did this wants us to think it was Terran. Who would gain from framing your people? She asked, her silver eyes sharp with thought. The same people who don't want us together, Drake replied. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just an attack. It was a calculated move to destabilize the fragile peace. Following the trail of evidence led Drake and Kalythra to a desolate outpost on the fringes of Vorellian space. They went alone, trusting no one but each other. The facility was abandoned, or so it seemed. As they explored its labyrinthine corridors, they discovered a hidden chamber filled with advanced holographic equipment. It's a forgery lab, Drake muttered, examining the devices. This is where they faked the Terran attack. And here's the proof, Kalythra said, activating a console. A series of logs revealed transmissions between the purists and an unknown third party, a faction operating beyond the known galaxy. Before they could transmit the data, the outpost shook violently. Self-destruct sequence, Kalythra said, her voice tight. Of course, Drake muttered, grabbing her hand. Time to go. They sprinted through collapsing corridors, debris raining down around them. As they reached their ship, Drake turned back briefly, his eyes narrowing. Whoever's behind this, he said, just made it personal. Back on Vorellia, the data caused an uproar. The third-party faction, identified as the Obsidian Syndicate, had been operating in the shadows for decades, profiting from galactic conflicts. Their goal is clear, Kalythra told the Council. They thrive on division. If we stand together, we can stop them. But not everyone was convinced. Some counselors questioned the data's authenticity, while others called for isolationism. Drake stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. I've fought wars, and I've seen what happens when fear drives decisions. This isn't just about Terrans or Vorellians. It's about the galaxy. If we don't unite now, we'll fall apart, one by one. Kalythra placed her hand on his, a silent show of solidarity. The Council's debate raged on, but cracks of hope began to form. As alliances solidified, the Obsidian Syndicate struck again, targeting a summit of key leaders. The attack was brutal, but it revealed their location, a hidden base on a rogue planet deep in uncharted space. We have to take the fight to them, Drake said, his voice resolute. It's a trap, Varith warned. Of course it is, Kalythra replied, her expression fierce. But we have no choice. They assembled a coalition fleet, a mix of Vorellian, Terran, and even Proximian ships. It was an unprecedented display of unity, one the Syndicate hadn't anticipated. The final battle was chaotic, the rogue planet's unstable gravity pulling ships into its orbit. But the coalition's combined strength prevailed. Drake and Kalythra led a ground assault on the Syndicate's command center, dismantling their operations and capturing their leader. The victory was hard-earned, but it marked the beginning of a new era. The Syndicate's defeat galvanized the galaxy, proving that unity was possible. Drake and Kalythra returned to Vorellia as heroes. But more importantly, they returned as partners, not just in politics, but in life. As they stood on the palace balcony, watching the stars, Kalythra took his hand. The galaxy is changing, she said. And we're changing with it, Drake replied. She smiled, her silver eyes gleaming. Together, we can face anything. Together, he agreed, pulling her close. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, their story was only beginning. But for now, they stood united, ready to face whatever came next. And for Drake, it all began with a wish that no one thought possible, a wish that changed everything. The galaxy was alive with change. The coalition that Drake and Kalythra had forged was no longer just a fragile alliance, but the foundation of a burgeoning interstellar union. Species once divided by centuries of mistrust now worked together, rebuilding, innovating, and exploring the stars. Yet, amidst this monumental transformation, personal sacrifices had been made. Drake stood in the nursery of the Celestial Palace, watching his daughter, Sarah Luminara Mir, as she played with a crystalline orb that floated gently around her. The orb pulsed with light in response to her giggles, a sign of her unique connection to the ancient Vorellian technology. At barely a year old, Sarah had already become a symbol of hope for the galaxy, a living embodiment of what unity could achieve. But for Drake, she was simply his daughter. "You're going to change everything," he said softly, crouching down to her level. She looked up, her mismatched eyes, one brown, one silver, glinting with an intelligence far beyond her age. Kalythra entered the room quietly, her crimson hair glowing faintly in the evening light. "She takes after you," she said, watching their daughter with a mixture of pride and awe. "Bold, reckless, and a little too stubborn for her own good," he joked, standing to meet her. Kalythra smirked. "You forgot impossibly charming." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of recent events hanging between them. The Obsidian Syndicate was defeated, but remnants of their ideology persisted, whispering in the dark corners of the galaxy. The purists had been driven underground, but Drake and Kalythra both knew their work was far from over. "Do you ever wonder," Kalythra began, "if we've done enough?" Drake turned to her, his expression softening. "Enough for what?" "For the galaxy. For Sarah." She gestured to their daughter, who was now stacking glowing cubes with the precision of a seasoned architect. "We've given her a future, but is it secure? Is it fair to bring her into a world still so full of conflict?" Drake placed his hands gently on her shoulders, drawing her gaze to his. "You once told me that peace is a battle of its own. We've won enough battles to give her a chance, a real one. And if the world isn't ready for her, then we'll keep fighting until it is." Kalythra smiled faintly, leaning her forehead against his. "You always find the words I need to hear." A soft chime interrupted their moment. Kalythra sighed, stepping toward the room's communication console. "Your Majesty," came Varitha's voice. "The council is ready for you." "I'll be there shortly," she replied, cutting the transmission. She turned back to Drake, her expression momentarily weary. Another debate on interspecies education protocols. "The Proximians are demanding more autonomy for their colony academies." "Sounds thrilling," Drake said, earning a smirk from her. "Come with me?" she asked, her tone lighter. "Always." The council chamber was a testament to the galaxy's newfound unity. Delegates from dozens of species filled the room, their unique physiologies and technologies blending into a kaleidoscope of diversity. The debates were heated but respectful, a far cry from the hostility of the past. Drake stood at Kalythra's side as she presided over the session with her usual poise. She addressed each argument with fairness, defusing tensions and finding compromises that seemed impossible just months ago. Watching her work, Drake felt a swell of pride. She was more than a queen. She was a leader in every sense of the word. When the session concluded, the delegates rose in unison, bowing to Kalythra before dispersing. As the room emptied, Kalythra turned to Drake, her silver eyes reflecting the crystalline light of the chamber. "Do you think they'll keep this going when we're gone?" she asked. "Without a doubt," Drake said, "because you've shown them it's possible." She tilted her head, studying him. "And what about you? You're as much a part of this as I am. None of this would have happened without your impossible wish." Drake chuckled. "I think it was more than just a wish. It was a choice, one I'd make again 1,000 times." Kalythra stepped closer, her voice soft. "And if the galaxy turns against us again? If everything we've built is threatened? Then we'll remind them," he said, "why we fight. Not for power or glory, but for each other. For Sarah. For the future." That evening, the royal family gathered on the palace balcony. The stars stretched endlessly above them, a vast expanse of potential and promise. Sarah sat on Kalythra's lap, her tiny hands reaching out toward the constellations. "Do you think she'll ever see all of it?" Kalythra asked, her gaze fixed on the sky. "She'll see more than we can imagine," Drake replied, "because she's going to inherit a galaxy worth exploring." As the moons of Vorellia rose, casting their silver light across the city, Drake felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he didn't fear the unknown. They had faced darkness together and emerged stronger. They had defied tradition, shattered barriers, and rewritten the rules of their galaxy. And at the heart of it all was their family, a union born of courage, love, and the audacity to dream. As Sarah giggled and the stars seemed to pulse in response, Drake wrapped his arm around Kalythra. "Some wishes," he said, his voice full of wonder, "are worth changing the universe for." Kalythra leaned into him, her voice a soft promise. "And some dreams are just the beginning." Above them, the stars shimmered, as if to agree.